setting up the context because I think Naveen is going to do a fantastic, all-encompassing presentation on this, which is about 30 to 35 minutes. Just to not interrupt the flow, please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can ask your questions. The more context you provide for the questions, the easier it is for us to answer. Obviously, this is supposed to be on point and on topic. This is not a customer support service for Naveen's company. So I will be screening questions on that as well. If you're joining us on LinkedIn or on the CII channels in YouTube, feel free to ask questions there. I will make sure that they are also included. And you can ask questions throughout the presentation, but we will try to address them more towards the end. I don't think Mr. Munjal needs any introduction. He's been a past president of CII, Delhi past chair. That is, he has been leading the electrical vehicle revolution in the country for many years. And of course, he is also the president of the SMEV Association, which is the Indian manufacturers of electrical vehicles. Naveen, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Aditya. Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today. So as Aditya was saying, that the format is going to be, I'll have a presentation which I'll run through. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me towards the end. So just keep them coming. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. So before I begin, I just want to, I hope that's visible.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay. So before I begin, when we look at any reports that are talking about electric mobility, whether it is the McKinsey or any other reports that we look at, essentially those reports look at EVs only from a four-wheeler perspective. So that's what they're talking about, because that's what globally works. But when you look at a country like India, the same reports and the same data doesn't quite apply in the same manner. So you've got to divide up India, you've got to divide up the whole category into various subcategories, so to speak. So you've got to look at it, the needs of each of the categories is very different from each other. So you've got to put two-wheelers in a different basket, you've got to put three-wheelers in a different basket, you've got to put commercial vehicles in a different, cars in a different, and public transport in different. The needs of each category are very, very different from each other. The stage at which they're going to take off or they're going to go up in a hockey stick curve are very different from each other. And I'll explain to you why I'm saying that. So that's the basic premise that I would want you to keep in mind. The second is that most of the presentation that I'm talking to you about is more attuned towards two-wheelers. And the reason that's the case is because India is a 80% two-wheeler market. And that's what we believe is going to be the low-hanging fruit. That's what's going to convert much faster than any other category. So let me run through the presentation. So basically, when you look at, this is more towards cars, but when you look at electric mobility, now in terms of, we've all read reports about less number of moving parts, less friction in the vehicle, etc. So that's actually true. So when you look at a car, in an IC engine car, there are anything from 150 to about 3,000 moving parts. Whereas when you look at electric mobility, it's anything from 19 to about 30 moving parts, substantially different from an IC engine vehicle. When you look at the parts that undergo wear and tear, fairly similar. The number is not that radically different from each other. Nevertheless, in electric, it is far less. So there's less pistons. There's no pistons that are moving up and down in the engine. There is no fuel burning, etc. All you've got is a fairly simple drive system, which is in a manner simple, but also very complicated because there's a lot of electricals and BMS that goes into the picture. But when you look at the drive system, for example, there is a motor, which is there on every wheel in a car. There is a shaft, which takes the energy. There is a battery, which is providing the energy to all the wheels. And then there is a BMS on top of it, and there are some telematics on top of that. So that's basically what happens in an electric vehicle car. Now, when you look at the life of a vehicle, electric versus IC, when you're able to replace the batteries when they reach the end of their life cycle, the life of the vehicle of electric is actually better than that of IC. Because what will happen is in an IC engine vehicle, after a period of time, the engine performance keeps on going down and down and down, simply because of wear and tear that happens in the engine. It's not quite the case in electric. So in terms of life, electric is better. In terms of power, the torque that you get from an electric vehicle is actually better than that what you get from an IC engine in the similar categories. So when you look at, there are numerous videos on YouTube where there is a comparison between a Tesla with a Aston Martin DB9 or a DB7 and a Porsche, etc., where the initial pickup for electric is far more, simply because of the less friction that's there in the vehicle. The experience of using an electric vehicle as against IC is also superior. So any of you who've ridden a Tesla, who've gone, or any electric vehicle for that matter, the experience is far better than that of an IC engine, simply because there's no vibration, there's no noise. Of course, in some categories, you do want the noise, and that's more the Harley Davidson kind of this thing. But nevertheless, when you look at it, it's a completely silent vehicle. In fact, there's artificial noise induced in some of the vehicles, simply because we as humans haven't really gotten used to seeing a vehicle coming our way without any noise in that manner. When you look at the running cost of an electric vehicle is also much better. The vehicles are improving dramatically. Electric is improving dramatically. So in terms of the ICE, everything that we look at in an electric versus what we had looked at in the last 5 years or 10 years, there's a dramatic shift which has already happened. When you look at the running cost, the TCO, electric is far superior to IC engine. The maintenance cost is also much better. Where electric actually takes a beating is the upfront cost. So when you do a comparable product, when it's the same performance, electric will be anything from 1.8 to 2.2 times more expensive than an IC engine. And when we look at a similar price point, the performance of electric will be lower than that of a price point of an IC engine. And there are numerous factors for that. One of the great big factors is because of the battery cost that you've got, which goes in on day one. So in a way, if you look at it, the comparison is in an IC engine, you're actually tanking up on fuel for the next number of years. Whereas here, you've got the whole battery, which you're buying on day one, and all you're doing is recharging it. The cost of recharge is far less than what it is for an IC engine. So it's far less than putting in a tank of fuel. And I'll show you later in a graph. The maintenance cost, as I said, is much better. In terms of the time to refuel, there are numerous technologies out there. So when we look at a two-wheeler, you could do swapping. When you look at a three-wheeler, you could do swapping. Not so much in a car, but there are technologies even in India where even in a bus, you can swap the battery in less time than it takes you to actually fill gas or fuel, a tank of fuel. So time refueling, range refueling is all at par now. Where electric loses out is the price, what I'm talking about. Now, this is how fast disruption can happen. I'm sure a lot of you would have seen this picture. So on the left is actually a picture. This both the pictures are of New York, Fifth Avenue, 1900 versus 1913. In a span of 13 years, what you see on the left side is a sea of horses. It's just horse carriages there. And there's one car there, which is circled in red. On the right side, it's all cars. And there's one horse carriage, which you can barely see because that's on the side. But so in a span of 13 years, that's all it took. And we've read enough about Nokia and Motorola and Kodak and other models, how fast disruption can come in. And that's exactly what's going to happen to mobility as well. We're already seeing it happening. We're already seeing a number of worldwide countries, UK, parts of Europe, parts of America, Japan, etc., talking about stopping IC engine completely from 2030, 2035 onwards. Not too far off, just a span of 10 years where you're going to see a transition, which is going to be far more radical than what you see on the screen right now. And some of the reasons why this is transitioning in such a way is that the amount of dollars that's going into R&D for electric, huge amounts of spend is being done on electric now and not so much in IC engine. Why it makes sense for India? When you look at the battery pricing, battery prices for lithium batteries have dropped by 85% in the last 10 years. So they've gone from $1,000+ now to about $160 per kilowatt hour. This is at the cell level. At the pack level, it's about 22.30. And this is expected to come down to about 110. And even though Bloomberg talks about this reducing down to about $75 by 2030, we believe that it's going to stabilize at about 110, about 100. And that's where our business model takes into account. We haven't gone below that. Simply because what's going to happen is that at some point of time, The battery price is going to stabilize, but the performance is going to keep on increasing. It's what you see with all our computers and our cell phones and everything. So price has kind of stabilized. Now, don't take Apple into account because that's more of a premium product, and that's taken the premiumness they're charging is more out of the brand than anything else that's going in. But when you look at the other smartphones, you look at computers, prices have kind of been stabilized or even gone down in the last number of years, yet the performance keeps on increasing. So we are following the Moore's curve when it comes to battery performance and the pricing. At this point of time, there is TCO parity. And so that's why you see the pyramid, you see the uphill task, which is there ahead of us. Going forward, there's going to be absolute economic parity as well. And that's not too far off. So there are estimations that by 2022, the batteries are going to be at par in terms of performance with the IC engine liter of fuel. In India, very important for us to have, I mean, most of us are from Delhi, I'm assuming, you know what's happening with the pollution levels outside. You know that we went from 12 of the 15 most polluted cities in the world being in India and 5 of them being NCR to 2 cities out of the complete list. And now we are inching back up again. So this is an actual picture of India Gate, which I'm sure all of us are aware of. Now, there are numerous studies again, which I don't need to bring in, but nevertheless, even Harvard talks about, and every study talks about the deadly combination of COVID along with PM 2.5. Now, both of them attack the lungs. And on top of that, when you've got winters where you've got chance of pneumonia, etc., that's a deadly combination waiting to happen. So in India, it is extremely important for us to switch to electric. The earlier, the better. Or let me not even put it electric. It has to be to zero emissions. We have to get into zero emissions. Now, India's dream, why I say two-wheelers and why my presentation is more towards two-wheelers is because 80% of the vehicles on the road are two-wheelers, 20 million vehicles on the road. The upfront cost for a two-wheeler is much smaller than that for a car. Infrastructural requirements are much simpler than that for a car. The distance traveled is much less. And the pressure that's the load that's put on the distance traveling is far less on a two-wheeler than it is on a car. So it is independent of a public charging infrastructure. Our batteries, for example, are all portable. You can take out the battery, plug it into your house apartment, wherever you are, or your office workspace, or wherever be the case. From a 5 amp outlet in the wall, charge your battery again, and then be able to run anything from 80 kilometers upwards to 210 kilometers, depending on what kind of a range vehicle that you're looking at. And I'll just show you that subsequently. Now, when we did our number crunching, we were calculating that how is the market going to convert? Is it going to be, what kind of level of conversion are we going to see? So there are numerous reports again. Niti Aayog, for example, talks about 80% conversion by 80 to 100% conversion by 2030. McKinsey talks about 25% by 2025. Niti Aayog at that point talks about 40% conversion by 2025. Numerous consultants talk anything from a 15% conversion, that's the most pessimist scenario, upwards to about 40% in the next 5 years. When we did our number crunching, we said, okay, let's look at numbers. So we looked at a conversion of only 9% by 2025 and a conversion of 30% by 2030. And even then the business makes sense because even that 9% conversion by 2025 in the next 5 years is going to be about over a 2 billion unit market. So it's going to be a substantially interesting market over the next couple of years. Now that's a jump we're looking at from 150,000 units this year, going upwards to 2 million in the next 5 years. That's a huge jump that we're going to see. So these are some of the basic assumptions that we've got. By 2025, 10 to 20% penetration, 2 to 4 million vehicles on the road. Now this is more, I'm talking about the two-wheelers. A market size of 125 to 250 billion rupees, and a B2B market, which is all your deliveries, food delivery, your e-commerce delivery, etc., to be about 30% of the market. Now, on the right side is the graph, is the chart, pie chart of how we see the market converting. Now, according to the ARAI definitions, there are just 2 categories, low speed and high speed. We've divided it into 3 categories: low speed, a city speed, and a high speed vehicle. Now, when you look at it at a global level, let me just give you a perspective there. At a global level, China is, of course, the market leader. They have about 27 million units per year of electric vehicles, two-wheelers. We've got Europe at about 4 million units. We've got Japan at about 400,000. We've got the US at about 400,000. We've got UK at about 150,000 to 200,000 units. Now, this is pre-COVID. During COVID, that number has gone up substantially. And those I'm talking about two-wheelers mainly. So during COVID, in fact, countries like Netherlands have gone more towards electric than they have towards the conventional bicycles. That's how fast the change is happening. Germany has gone much higher in terms of growth number during COVID than what they were doing prior to COVID. The electric cycles in some parts of these European countries is actually now replacing a car. So anybody who had a second car and they were using it for their milk runs and for their grocery shopping, etc., are now using electric mobility, electric vehicles, electric cycles mainly to actually get there. Now, majority of the vehicles, when we look at this two-wheelers, China 90% plus is two-wheeler, is a low-speed market, as against this definition, which is below 25 kilometers an hour. Same as Europe is about 98%. US is between 22 to 25 to 32 kilometers an hour. Japan is all 25. Korea is all 25. India is the only market where we are pushing vehicles to go above 40 kilometers an hour in terms of the speed of the vehicles, the two-wheelers. And I'll explain to you why that's the case. So this is broadly the segment, what we see segmentation happening. I've got another chart which I'll show you later. So what we anticipate is a low speed and a city speed vehicles to be the majority chunk of the market going forward. Now, this is a very important chart because this is where there's a substantial amount of tailwinds for this category. The government has been pushing this category since a long time. So earlier we had MNRE, which was pushing it. This was in 2009-10. Then in 2013 came the time when NEMMP, National Electric Mobility Mission 2020, which said that 14,000 crores investment by the government would yield 40,000 crores for the exchequer. Now, this was not taking into account so much of health. This was taking mainly oil into account, that this is only oil saving that we're going to be doing. In 2015 came FAME 1, which had an allocation of 890 crores. It was supposed to be for 2 years, went on till 2019. And in 2019, we've got FAME 2, which has come in, which has got an allocation of 10,000 crores. Now, a large part of that is towards public transport, three-wheelers, four-wheelers, but more for strong hybrids and electric, but more towards commercial use, not so much towards passenger use, and getting 1 million two-wheelers on the road. At this point of time, it's not been a very successful policy. Nevertheless, the push is there. So we are 1.5 years down the line. The policy is nowhere close to, in terms of the numbers, we are nowhere close to what we should have been by now. We are much lower than that. But besides central policies, there are numerous state policies also which are coming into play. So we've got a very interesting policy, Delhi being the most aggressive, where there is a huge focus on two-wheelers. So there is, you can get a subsidy of up to 30,000 rupees on two-wheelers in the Delhi policy. They have a speed criteria, which is the vehicle should do 40 kilometers an hour, but there's no range criteria, which is there in FAME 2 policy. And that's a disaster. That's not a very good policy from that perspective, the FAME 2. Then you've got a large conversion of the delivery vehicles being converted from IC to electric in the next couple of years. So the policy states 50% conversion by 2023 and 100% by 2025. Similarly, for consumer vehicles, and this is more for two-wheelers, they are expecting 50% of the vehicles on the road, two-wheelers, to be electric by 2024. Exemption of road tax, exemption of other taxes, etc. on vehicles is also on the way. Then we've got Tamil Nadu, which is pushing. We've got Telangana, we've got Kerala, we've got Uttarakhand, we've got Maharashtra, we've got Gujarat. Every state is pushing their own policies. Now, not all the policies are very, very effective, because one of the mistakes that a number of these states are making is to give a policy or support manufacturing of electric mobility in that state, rather than creating the pull. So what you're doing is basically you are subsidizing, or you're giving tax benefits for companies to come into your state to manufacture, but you're not creating that pull. And that is a problem which happens even with FAME 2. There is a pull, but that pull is not great enough at this point of time. But in spite of that, in spite of all these issues, the market continues to expand, and I'll show you how. So Hero Electric, we've been in this space since very long, actually. 2000, we introduced electric cycles in India. It didn't quite work. Reintroduced again in 2004, electric cycles, again didn't work. And that's the time in 2003-4, we were testing out lithium-ion batteries. So we were working with an American company at that point. In Las Vegas, I was testing out lithium-ion batteries. Now, of course, the technology is far more advanced than what it was at that point. But at that point of time, basically the problem that happened was that you had a array of batteries. And if your one cell failed in between, the whole pack would shut down. To figure out the alternate methods by which the power still continues to the other parts of the battery, we hadn't figured out at that point of time. 2007, when we launched our scooters, that's when we realized the classical mistake that we were making. And that was that the customer, the Indian consumer, is a highly aspirational consumer. So his growth journey, his path is cycle, scooter, motorcycle, car, and then possibly electric cycle. His journey is not an electric cycle coming right before any of the IC engine or before these vehicles, simply because he's not looking at it from a convenience standpoint. He's looking at it from his own social strata standpoint. And so that's the mistake that we were making. The market was also too nascent at that point of time. Then we continued to expand the market. 11, 12, the markets completely crashed. In fact, so badly that the competition began to pull out of the market. What we started doing at that point is telling our dealers to start supporting even the competition vehicles. Because the problem with that was that if you've got multiple companies who are supporting this or who are supplying vehicles to the market, and then they start shutting down, what happens to the customers who bought those vehicles? How will the industry survive if the companies only begin to shut down? So the reason for that, for us to support, was to keep the industry alive. But what it also did is kept the whole dealer network alive because it gave them additional revenue and a lot of goodwill also for us, which we hadn't really anticipated initially, but we didn't really bargain for it. Post then, there has been a lot of changes that have happened. We've been growing steadily since then. We've been building the market. We've been expanding the market. Now, when we look at overall market in India, like I said, in two-wheelers, the market's about 150,000 units. We are at about 35, 38, 40% of the total market. We are larger than number two, number three, number four, number five combined together, both in terms of the network and in terms of the market volume. So we've got a very, very strong market. We've got a very strong brand, which we carry with us. And we've got a very strong dealer network, which I'm just going to show you. Plus, what we've been able to do is create a image, create a brand within the customers of Hero Electric, which is more tuned towards clean energy vehicles. Now, this is our product range, fairly widespread. We've got 14 models, bases of the 5 chassis that we have, 5 platforms. Starting at Flash, which is the entry level, we've got Nix, which is targeted at the delivery segment, Optima, which is the best-selling EV in the country, Dash, which is the premium end of the low speed, and Photon, which is in the high speed category. Now, what we've done is across these vehicles, we've got different variants also available. So it could be a low speed vehicle or could be a city speed vehicle, depending on what variant you choose. The interesting part is that across this entire product range, we have one battery system. So we've got one portable battery. That battery weighs about 10 kilos. So depending on which vehicle you choose, like for example, a Nix, you could have a vehicle which goes to 80 kilometers range, and you could have a vehicle which goes to 210 kilometers because that would have 3 batteries in it. Now, as a customer, you decide what you want. 1 battery, 2 batteries, 3 batteries. They're all portable. They're all removable, and you can all... The advantage with that is numerous advantages. One of them is to do with the company. So we are able to maintain our inventory levels much better at a company level. The dealer doesn't have to maintain that level of inventory. For a B2B customer, which we have many, they have a range of vehicles. A battery bank could be charging at the back. You just come in, plug your battery, unplug your battery, plug in a new one, and off you go again. And for a consumer, we've got 40% of our repeat sales. So these consumers who have already bought a vehicle and they buy another one, they don't have to worry about the battery. And now you can also buy a vehicle without the battery and yet get subsidies and rebates from the government. So in terms of the ease of use and convenience, we are quite right up there. In terms of the initial price points, now Optima, which is the best-selling electric vehicle in the country, we've been able to bring a city speed vehicle, which is at 45 kilometers an hour, goes to 80 kilometer range. We've been able to bring that price point down to about 58,000 rupees. Now, that is lower than that of a IC engine 100cc vehicle as well. So we've got very high degree of flexibility when you choose as a customer, range, speed, and low speed versus high speed, and a range criteria, and also the telematics that go in. So we have 4 levels of telematics, which we offer to IoT, which we offer to the customer, and the customer decides what he wants to really use. Now, this is just to show you how the market's going to evolve. On the left, the red triangle is the red pyramid is actually the current IC engine market. 20 million units a year out of which majority of the market, 85% of the market, is actually a sub 90,000 rupee price point. This is post BS6 vehicles as well. Uh, Only 3 million vehicles, only 15% of the market is above 90,000. So that's there you've got all your premium end of the motorcycles and scooters and everything. So chunk of the market is your market, which is the bottom of the pyramid or the center of the pyramid. Now this is the commuter segment, and this is a segment where the customers are buying these vehicles to get from place A to place B. So they are not going to be, if they're buying a vehicle at 80,000, they're not going to buy a vehicle at 1,40,000 simply because it's electric. Even though the TCO may be lower than that, what they're paying right now, but nevertheless, they're not going to buy it because the initial purchase price is so high. What they're going to do is from 80, they may go up to 90,000, 10% here or there, and that's about it. The minute you go beyond 90,000 and 1 lakh rupees, that falls more into a lifestyle category. And there it's not, economics is not the driver of the purchase. On the right side, in the center, is the current EV market. 150,000 units, majority of it, 70% of it is city speed, is low speed, and only 28% is in the city speed category, which is about 45 kilometers an hour. When you look at it from us, from most of our cities, Delhi, Bangalore, Mumbai, the average speeds are anything from about 18, 20 kilometers up to about 25, 30 kilometers, nothing beyond that. So city speed works brilliantly from that perspective. It's got the torque, it's got the speed to get you within a place A, place B in the city at the same or faster speed than what you would in a car or another vehicle. This is going to transition this market. On the right side, the bigger green pyramid is what is going to happen in the next 5 years. So 69% of the low speed is actually going to become 49%. That's a market which is going to reduce. And 28% is actually going to increase to 36%, which is the city speed category. High speed, which is only 4% of the overall market at this point of time, is going to change to about 15%, which is going to be in line with the current IC engine premium end of the category. Now, we as a company are playing in all of these categories. So we've got the low speed vehicles, which is there. We've got the city speed, which is Optima E5. We've got the higher speed, which is Photon. And then we've got the motorcycle as well, AE47, which is ready for launch at some point of time. Now, that is your initial purchase price. I spoke to you about that, we've already got the price points down. Now, when you look at the TCO of an electric versus IC engine, so a low speed vehicle over a period of 5 years, if you're using the vehicle for 40 kilometers a day, is going to cost you just 1,05,000 rupees over the period, taking battery replacement also into account. A city speed vehicle, which is Optima E5, will cost you about 135. And then you've got a high speed vehicle and you've got a high speed motorcycle, and then you've got your IC engine going upwards to about 2.25 lakhs. So the difference is anything, a person who's using a scooter, IC engine, or a high speed electric mobility at half the price over a period of time, if you're using the vehicle on a day-to-day basis, taking battery replacement also into account. So the economics make absolute sense from a city to a low speed vehicle category. Now, when you look at your daily running cost, now, if you're commuting 30 kilometers a day and you look at your span of 6 years, a low-speed electric vehicle will only cost you 12 rupees a day. This is taking charging and servicing into maintenance into account. And again, mid-city speed will cost you 15, a high-speed vehicle will cost you 17. As against public transport or metro and auto, this is taken in a city like Delhi. It would be different for different cities, which costs you 80 rupees a day if you're commuting 30 kilometers on a day-to-day basis. So when you look at it, your TCO cost and your average running cost and your initial purchase price, electric makes absolute sense now. In terms of Hero Electric itself, we've got a very wide network, and this is all exclusive to Hero Electric. So that's all we do. That's all they do. They don't do any other business. So we already have over 450 dealerships across the country, over 200 plus sub-dealers. We've got a plant in Punjab, in Ludhiana, and we've got a warehousing in South India, and the next one being set up in East India. Now, when you look at what we've also started doing besides a dealer network, so we were very clear that the dealer who's coming in or our team which is coming in has to be 100% focused only on electric. It cannot be a side business. It cannot be a subset of any other company. It cannot be a business where I'm going to do something else, but if I have time, I'll handle electric as well. That's just not possible. because the level of attention, the level of push that this business requires is probably even more than what a conventional stable business requires, simply because we have to set up the whole thing here. We have to convince the customer, we have to convince the dealers of coming in to come into this sector. We have, what we've also started doing is training a primary service point. Now, this is your roadside mechanic. This is a guy who's going to be there to fix your vehicle for basic problems, flat tire, etc., those kind of things. We've already trained up 4,000 of these during the COVID and during in the last 1 year. The idea is we're going to take this up to about 12,000 in the next 2 years. We've already installed about 1,500 charging stations, even though we're telling the customers you don't really need a charging station simply because you're charging the vehicle at home. But nevertheless, there is anxiety. So if there's range anxiety, we've got to handle it rather than us brushing it under the carpet saying that you don't need it. So we've already installed 1,500 of those. And the target is to install about 20,000 of these in the next 2 years across the country. These are going to be the yellow charging station that you look at. It's a low-cost charging station, something as what you use in an airport for a mobile phone, etc., all of those things. So it's 10 rupees for 1 hour and 5 rupees for half an hour. So this would be there in dense markets where you go to a Kirana store or one of these stores, and you can park your vehicle there for 1 hour while you go and do your work and come back and just pay the guy and take your vehicle. And that's going to give you a range of about 25, 30 kilometers, depending on how much time you've charged your vehicle for. In terms of the economics for dealers, at our level, at a company level, we don't sell any vehicle which is at a gross negative. So we have a healthy gross positive margin at a EBITDA level. When you look at it from a dealer standpoint, about 44% of majority of our dealers, 44 have got a ROCE of over 44% if they stayed over 3 years with us. So if they've been with us for 3 years, they are able to get a return of over 44% on the capital employed. Now, the reason for that is that the cost of the investment that goes into electric vehicle showroom or the infrastructure is much less than what it is for an IC engine. The service center is much smaller. It's all electronic. You don't need the number of people in order to service an electric vehicle as you do for IC engine. There's no fuel change. There's nothing of that sort. Also, to break even for an IC engine, you need about 125 vehicles a month. This is an average. And for electric, you need only about 10 vehicles a month in order to break even. Just some things that we do. So we sponsor the Super Sick Run. We've just finished the TOK, which is the tour of Karnataka, which finished last week in Karnataka. That was a cycle race. And then we've got numerous awards: Cycle of the Electric Vehicle of the Electric Company, EV Company of the Year, vehicles, etc., all of that. Another very interesting campaign which we've just finished or which we've just done is with India Today, and that's the Let India Breathe campaign. Now, Let India Breathe was all about the problems that we have here in terms of the air pollution. So it wasn't to talk about the problems, but it was more to talk about the solutions that exist right now. So, for example, for the parali burning, there are solutions available right now which are low cost. It was addressing those issues. For even the vehicular dust plus automotive pollution, etc. These are the issues which we wanted to talk about. So we've just finished that campaign with India Today. Some of the exhibitions that we do, I'll just skim through this. Again, some digital campaigns. A lot of it talks about the environment. It talks about the smart move. It talks about the future. It talks about leaving the world a better place for our children, as we've seen happening with Diwali, with the firecrackers, etc., which has come down. So that's what we anticipate is going to happen with electric mobility as well. Now, these are the tailwinds which exist. So this is a summary of the push that we've already got. So there is very strong policies which are in place. Now, these policies, whether they're effective or not, but the point is that they are pushing in the right direction. They are creating that awareness. So that push is already there. Now, whether just that noise is creating that awareness and that's creating a pull in the market. Battery prices, as I told you, have been reducing substantially over the last number of years. The customers are getting very well aware of electric mobility. So what we did is, when COVID began, so we started reaching out. We started an outreach to the customers using digital media with our dealers. So we trained up our dealers to handle social media. And we said, look, it cannot be a brick and mortar versus digital. It's got to be in combination. So it's got to be a click and mortar business that we do. It's good for you. It's good for us. Now, how do you really reach out to the customers? So a large part of the customers that we reached out to, they sent us the data at that point of time with the promotions, but they did not buy an electric vehicle. They did not buy a vehicle. So what we did is we started doing these webinars like what I'm doing with you right now. And we did numerous of these where we touched about over 3,000 customers in a direct interaction like this with our senior team and addressing the issues that they have with electric mobility or what they would like to see. So understanding it better. One of the factors was that we've not tried out an electric vehicle. We are aware of it, but we've not tried it out. So अगर try नहीं किया तो इतना महंगा vehicle कैसे लें? So now all our promotions are 3-day return policy. So you try the vehicle at home. We deliver the vehicle to you at home. You try it for 3 days. If you don't like it, you return it back to us. Now, what's happened is whatever number that we had done online last year, we are already at 15x of that in the online platforms this year. So it's a hybrid between online and even if it's online sale, we route it through the dealer because we want the dealer to be involved for the service part of it when it comes down to it. AQI levels absolutely need to be reduced. Clean mobility, I mean, I've already spoken about it, the impact on the lungs. Customer mindset, customer is more willing to adopt newer vehicles now than what they ever were earlier. We've already seen that happening with the cycling clubs that have mushroomed all over the country and how people have taken to cycling and getting out in the open more than ever before. And now another interesting part is traction in the whole EV ecosystem. Till last year, or till a few years back, we were doing a couple of these webinars and we were doing a couple of these meetings, etc. But now it's a constant. I mean, every week there's something or the other which is happening, and all through the year. So there is a lot of traction that is happening, customer awareness, but also from the ecosystem, the supply chain ecosystem. That ecosystem is the companies, tier 1, tier 2 companies are now more and more willing to invest into this infrastructure than what they were earlier. Now they don't want to miss that bus. They want to be on it much earlier rather than missing it. While there are strong tailwinds, there are headwinds as well. Everything's not hunky-dory. There are issues. Why is this industry not taken off? Why has it not become bigger than what it should have been by now? And one of the factors is lack of awareness. When we go outside of these forums, the awareness levels are still very poor. Our market outreach program is, even though it's very good for our industry, but overall, when you look at it from a country standpoint, or when you look at it from a competition that we have from IC, etc., it's not that effective. It's not that big. Lack of financing. When you look at IC, majority of the vehicles are financed. When you look at our vehicles, less than 5% of the vehicles are financed. The reason for that is that even the financiers, even though we've got 9 strong relationships, the financiers have still not figured out the resale value of the vehicles once a battery is taken out, because a battery could account for anything from 25 to 40% of the cost of the vehicle. So if the battery goes out, then what happens to the resale value of the vehicle? So that's something that will be determined. In spite of this factor, we continue to see a upward trend. So we are growing and we are looking at a 15x growth in the next 5 years, in spite of any of these issues that may be happening. Price acceptance of customers is still a concern, where customers have still not understood the combination of pricing versus performance. There is still some anxiety on that. There are still poor products coming out from a lot of companies who are non-serious in this space. They come in thinking that it's a no maintenance vehicle. It's not a no maintenance. It may be a low maintenance vehicle, but certainly not a no maintenance vehicle. And there is mismatch of expectations versus performance, which I've already spoken about. And like I said, policies, even though they may be there, they're not necessarily always productive in terms of the number, what they're pushing through. So when you look at it, technology, policy, economics, companies, they're all falling in line. Some of them may or may not be working as effectively right now, but the market is still expanding, nevertheless, in spite of all of these issues. So this is just, I'm ending my presentation. 1 tree planted reduces close to 100 kgs of CO2. 1 liter of fuel burned is 2.4 kgs of CO2. And if you're using an electric vehicle, 30 kilometers a day for 6 years, you are actually helping plant 30 trees just by using that electric mobility. Some of our certifications. So like I said, we follow Code Green, which is our own certification, which is also a CSR project, CSR work that we do. We are one of the few companies which are CDM certified by the UNDVC for carbon credits. We are one of the very few automotive companies SA 8000 certified. SA 8000 is social audit for social awareness, and we are a platinum green building from office standpoint. I've already spoken about some of this, so I'm going to jump straight into questions. More than happy to answer any. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here today.
And I mean, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I think the level and depth of data, particularly on the two-wheeler space, I think is, I mean, I am certainly surprised, how much has changed within in a very short amount of time. We have a ton of questions. So I think I'm almost up to 2025. So I'm going to try to bucket them into themes so we can handle them in small thematic batches. First thing is just we have a couple of strategic questions. One big one is, why the scooter? I mean, one of the classical thought processes of India, and you briefly touched upon this, is that aspirational desire. And that's why I know a lot of people say that's why the Nano failed. No one wants to be seen as aspiring towards driving the poor man's car. It's also one of the reasons why you have Akshay Kumar in all the motorcycle ads, jet planes flying and stunts and all. And we've seen a massive, if you go to any street in Delhi or Mumbai, etc., you're seeing motorcycle. The scooters are barely there. Why didn't you think of doing, competing against the 100cc motorcycle? Why the scooter form factor?
Very valid point, Aditya. See, when you look at a motorcycle, the performance takes a very important role. So, by the way, India is the only market globally where motorcycle has such a strong relevance. When you look at other parts, other Asian countries, no matter which one you look at, whether it's Taiwan or even Indonesia or Vietnam, which is a large two-wheeler market, the general form factor of a two-wheeler is not necessarily a motorcycle. It's more of a scooter, or it's a in-between kind of a this thing. India is the only market where we transitioned completely to motorcycles a number of years back, a number of decades back. That's when the Japanese came into the picture. And now the growth in the scooters is actually much more than that what it is in the motorcycles for various reasons, ease of use, convenience, etc., all of that. When you look at electric vehicles, now a large part of the battery, a large part of the weight actually is the battery. Now that battery, if you have it in a motorcycle, then your center of gravity, you're shifting it up. That's one reason. Whereas in a scooter, what happens is it's in your floorboard or it's below you, it's much lower. And so the center of gravity remains low, the vehicle becomes much easier to ride. In a motorcycle, if you need that performance and if you need that speed and range and performance, the battery size becomes much larger. The expectations of performance of a motorcycle as it is are much larger than that they are of a scooter. The market that it's targeting is also slightly different. So from a technical standpoint, you could easily do a motorcycle, but then the vehicle will become much more expensive. So already, if you have a motorcycle form factor with a vehicle which goes 80 kilometers in terms of speed and a range of 80 kilometers, you're looking at a vehicle which is going to be 1.5 lakhs and above. So as it is, you are in a niche of the overall category. And then if you go into a further niche, it's too small a market.
So globally, so it's the fundamental expectations that when they see a motorcycle, there's a price performance thing ratio, which right now where battery technologies may not be practical.
Plus, it's a convenience. It's an ease of use as well. It's a segment that these vehicles are targeting. It's a commuter segment. It's a segment where people are using these vehicles to deliver goods, to carry goods back and forth. So
it's a large B2B segment.
So it's also B2B segment, yes.
So, you mentioned one of the ways that, and we have a couple of questions on range anxiety, right? And so, you mentioned one of the ways that you manage to handle that is by having these swappable batteries. You have a battery at home, you're on your scooter, you might have one in the office. So you always have, just like you have your cell phone charge anxiety, you're able to get power packs. And, I know people who have multiple of them everywhere, and, even though you don't use it, it's there. What is the price of a battery as a percentage of the overall scooter cost?
So it could be anything depending on what vehicle you're looking at. It could be anything from about 25 to 40% of the vehicle cost.
So it's a fair amount. So essentially, if you're buying one scooter and you're saying I need 2 extra batteries, you're pretty much buying half another scooter.
No, it depends. Now, if you're looking at it, like I said, so in our vehicles, so what we've tried to do is make Optima, for example, HX, which we've just launched at 58,000 price point. That's a vehicle which will give you 45 kilometers speed with an 80 kilometer approximately range. Now that we feel is the probably the best combination that exists. Given the
And then if you were to buy an extra battery for that, approximately what are you,
24,000 rupees.
about half the price.
Yeah,
The battery is still the major cost that
battery is
is
still
really
a
holding
large
the
cost.
market bags.
Battery is still a large cost, but like I showed you also, when you take even two batteries into account,
Right. It's
your TCO of electric is far lower than that
No,
of a.
absolutely. And because you had that wonderful graph when you started off, I think, where the big point you were making is that it was the battery technology becoming cheaper is what pushing the electric. And I think that sort of number that the battery is almost 50% of the purchase cost of of an electrical scooter. I think that sort of drives it home why battery technology is so important here. The second thing is, one of the big things, and this is again, I think someone in this group really loves motorcycles, but one of the ways, Tesla and a lot of electrical vehicles got acceptance. First, if you look at, back in the day, you had the first major brand was the Toyota Prius, right? And that was sort of the brand that, hey, I'm environmentally conscious, that's why I get a Prius. There was a bragging right of being environmentally conscious, and that was derided by a lot of very traditional car people. It's not a performance car, etc. And then you had a lot of electrical vehicles come in, and there were these wonderful videos of showing them having acceleration races with Corvettes and Ferraris and all, because the inherent acceleration capabilities of an electrical vehicle is extraordinary. You can go to 0 to 60 pretty
Yeah.
fast compared to a standardized engine. But do you see that same level of performance differential in the two-wheeler segment, or it's still balanced out?
So let me understand the question. So is it that performance vehicles are going to be more? Is that what you're saying?
No, no, indeed. So, and I guess this, since most of us have never driven an electrical two-wheeler, if we were to take a standard gasoline engine or a diesel engine car at a similar price point of an electrical vehicle, almost all the electrical vehicles will have a superior 0 to 60, right? A very fast acceleration space compared, which makes it very interesting for people going from like stoplight to a stoplight and maneuvering all across India. Do you see that same acceleration jump when it comes to two-wheelers? Is it comparable? Is it less?
So it's comparable. So it depends on which way you look at it. So what we've done in some of our vehicles is we've capped the speed but increased the torque. So your acceleration when you get from 0 to whatever be the speed that you're going, you suddenly get that jerk. So when you're standing still, because people wanted to be first off the mark when it comes from a traffic signal.
And you've seen, that huge scooter lineup at the start, like everybody has to
Absolutely,
scoot first.
absolutely. So in some cases we've done that. In some cases we haven't. In some cases we've just kept it at that you gradually go up there because these are more efficient vehicles. So the way that we've divided it up is in a number of these cases these are going to be used as commuter segment. Uh, just to give you a perspective, in when you earlier days when you looked at motorcycles, this is I'm talking about the 80s. You had Bajaj and you had Hero and you had Kawasaki and you had all of the others. The torque that existed on a Bajaj motorcycle at that point of time was far superior to most of the other vehicles within the 100cc. Yet the Hero Honda at that point delivered far more mileage on a per liter of fuel than what Bajaj did at that point of time. So when you look at it, there's a fine balance between the torque, speed, and the performance. So we are trying to straddle that balance well. So in some cases, we've given the torque, which will give you very quickly. In some cases, we haven't.
So essentially, that's why you have such a wide range. People have to decide themselves what priority. And we have a question. I just want to make it clear. What is the cheapest if someone were to walk in to a Hero Electric showroom? What is the cheapest scooter they can walk off with?
Depending on what market you're in, you could effectively walk off with a vehicle at about 41,000, but that's a lead acid market vehicle. That's something that we've been phasing out for the past, for this year. So in some markets may still exist, but that's effectively a price point.
Price point.
40,000.
And with the newer battery?
About 55,000, 57,000.
So this is an answer to a couple of people who've asked, what is the cheapest? It's about 55 is where we're at. So that's
58,000.
a very reasonable.
Yeah. I would say sub 60,000 for a good this thing. And I'm talking about this is a city speed vehicle. When it's a low speed vehicle, then the price could be even slightly lower than 55,000.
Brilliant, G. So a lot of questions on sustainability and batteries. I'm going to take them one by one. First, very classic questions. Everyone's pushing an electrical vehicle, but the electricity to charge them has to be come up, right? And for a lot of countries, including India, that means more coal, more gas, more this. And so I'm paraphrasing the questions, but the very similar notion: are we just punting the problem instead of burning it on the street? We are burning it at the power plant. How do you see that differential? Are we really saving the environment, or we're just polluting somebody else's backyard instead of our own? And second, particularly in India, is our electricity grid? I mean, you showed that wonderful picture of New York completely transforming. If this thing takes off, in maybe 10 years, 15 years, we are going to see a huge number of electrical vehicles on the road. Does India have the capability of generating that amount of electricity?
Totally valid points, and I should have actually covered in my presentation. I generally do anticipate this question and give that answer right in the beginning itself. Okay, so when you look at it, let me address the first part, which is, do we have enough electricity load or not? Do we have electricity power? So this is the global phenomenon and not an Indian phenomenon, where electricity that's generated, no matter which way you generate it, the consumption of electricity power drops substantially at night. Now, that is because all our power plants continue working, especially when it's thermal. Had we been completely on solar, then we would have had more of an issue, because then we would have to store that electricity in a battery banks and then be able to charge the vehicles at night. So here, at a global level, everywhere in the world, the power consumption drops substantially.
But the production remains the same.
Production
right?
remains the same.
Because you can't downsize a power plant very much.
You can't downsize. You can't switch it off at night and then switch it back on the next morning. So here, that is one factor. The production continues, but it's not getting used. So, and electric vehicles will get actually charged at night and not during the day. Generally, that's going to be the case. So they're not putting any additional load. In fact, they help in balancing out the load that is already there on the grid. So they actually help in taking that load better. That's one part. In fact, there's differential pricing also, which has come in. So in the West, in US, etc., what you could actually do is charge your vehicle at night and then at a lower rate, and then charge and deliver that power, give that power back to the utility company during the day. So, I mean, that's also happening. That trading is also happening now. That's one factor. So we have more than enough. There is some report, which I think I'll have to pull out, where even if all the vehicles in India to convert to two-wheelers were to convert to electric, the additional load on the grid is only about 4%. On the peak loads. So it's not that much. Yeah.
I think that's, 4%, it's not even double digits, right?
Not even double digits. It's not even double digits.
Naveen, how many, we have a number of questions on this. How many vehicles are there right now in India per year or total, which are electric?
We've sold, let's say, per year is about 150,000. We have about 350,000 vehicles on the road since our inception. I would anticipate now running probably about 700,000 vehicles, 800,000 vehicles, sub million two-wheelers.
We have one question on, I think looking at your initial slides about, 2030 getting there. What's the capacities do you currently have? Tomorrow morning, Modi ji comes on TV and says that if you're a true patriot, you have to buy one of these vehicles, and everybody runs out and starts buying one. And there's a waiting period for 6 months. What's the max capacity could you hit in a year's time? Because one of the issues is that the so-called the global giant Tesla famously struggled to ramp up production year after year.
See, it's always difficult to strike that balance of at what point do you expand your capacity versus waiting for the demand to increase. We are right now running at almost 100% capacity, the plant. So this year we're going to be at this thing. We've already started expanding the facility now. So we are going to be tripling the capacity in the same location that we are in Ludhiana. That's the first step. Next year, we'll start planning for our second facility also outside of Ludhiana. So that's something that we're going to be doing. So we have capacity as the demand's going to increase. We have capacities for now. And we are building up for the next 2 years, 3 years. And then next year, we'll start planning for the next 3 years hence. So because it takes about a year and a half for the capacity to really come online. So that's about the capacities. I just want to address that other point about the pollution, taking it from our vehicles and plugging it somewhere else. Now, that's a very critical point, actually, when we look at it. So the problem that we have right now is an urban problem, the air pollution. It's not a rural problem so much. It's more of an urban problem that we have, because in cities, in an urban setting, vehicles generate anything from 45 to 70% of the pollution that is there. Air pollution is from vehicles alone, depending on what city you're in. Now, what happens is, when you've taken this power and you've plugged it back into a thermal plant, even though that is running at the regular capacity that it was, and you don't have to enhance that capacity, but it's much easier to control the PM 2.5 and the PM 10s and everything at a central plant location, because you've got enough scrubbing out there. I mean, power plants, as we used to have in the olden days, there used to be black smoke spewing out. You don't see that any longer. You see white smoke coming out now, because that's all scrubbed. So it's much easier to control pollution at a central level than it is at an individual vehicle level. Because no matter what you do, no matter what level of technologies you deploy, the minute you're burning fuel, there is going to be some kind of emissions that happen. So
I think that's a very important point, because even if you come out with pollution control measures, we keep doing Bharat 2, Bharat 3, Bharat 4 norms, but at the end of the day, if at an industrial scale, you can deploy a lot more technologies and systems to really control emissions than pushing it into the automotive industry, which is particularly in a price-sensitive market like India.
Absolutely.
Various thing. I think that's a very good point. In lots of questions on batteries. I'm going to run through a bunch of them. First, the Atmanirbhar question. How much of this is actually made in China and assembled in India? How much of this manufacturing actually is happening in country?
See, the manufacturing, when you look at the mechanicals, that's doable, easily doable here. And that's something that the process started a number of years back. That said, when you look at things like batteries, even till date, there is no real battery manufacturer in India. Now, it's a chicken and egg situation. For everybody, when you look at it, it's a commercial decision. That should we wait for the market to expand first, or should we really lay out the manufacturing facility and spend tens of millions of dollars? Because a battery plant is an expensive plant, a cell plant. Or do we lay out those investments into those plants and then wait for the markets to expand? So there is a mismatch there. Companies are waiting for the market to expand. We are waiting for companies to invest into the battery technology itself and other technologies like the batteries.
I mean, how much of this is dependent on China? So that's one of the questions that that keep coming up. And we've talked about this in another conversation. The entire thing about rare earth metals, the entire thing about that look, tomorrow if and we've had a few trade kerfuffles with China supply chains right now. And tomorrow, if you're unable to source rare earth metals or even source the batteries themselves, do we have reasonable alternatives, or everything comes to a standstill?
See, it depends. I mean, that's more of a political decision then. That's not a commercial or economic decision to be taken.
I'll rephrase that, G. We have no control about these things. What will happen, right?
Correct.
But tomorrow, if China and India trade is affected, obviously it's not going to stop. I don't think anybody's saying that. But there might be a 90-day delay or a 100-day delay. Are there alternative battery manufacturers in the world who are able to meet that same price and performance?
Not the same price. Pricing would go. So you've got Taiwan, you've got Korea, you've got Japan, and you've got.
What's the price differential between like a Chinese battery and some other countries still?
So China, simply because of the economics and simply because of the scale that they work at. So forget electric mobility for a minute. But even if you look at IC engine overall, and that's an industry which has been there for 100 years, and is an extremely mature market. Over 80% of the world IC engine market relies on China in some form or other for supplies. So if that were to completely shut down, then there is a loads more other things which will shut down. Our medical industry, there's lots of disruption that's going to happen. Electric vehicles is a very small part of the whole thing. Yes, China is a strong supplier in this because they've gone in the last 10 years and bought out mines in whether it's Australia or Chile or wherever be the case. That doesn't stop our Indian companies from doing the same thing. But what's also happening is that the chemistry of the battery is changing. So in the last number of years, the the content of lithium in a battery has already reduced substantially. Going forward, the batteries maybe completely have very, very less lithium in them going forward because the chemistry is changing so dramatically. And this at a global level, countries are realizing that do they want to continue relying so much on China because they've gone and controlled the supply chain so strongly. But that said, there are a number of Australian companies, there are European companies, there are South American companies, there are American, there's a whole bunch of other sources that you can buy.
So it's a pricing issue. It's not a
Pricing
strategic
issue.
issue.
It's a purely a pricing issue.
Naveen, so that and lots of questions on this as well. I'm going to club two of them together. You mentioned the change of chemistry of a battery technology. I think that's one of the big price point changes that are happening, and we are seeing a lot of good work. I mean, Stanford certainly has a lot of stuff coming out on this. MIT, I believe, has some very good papers on this, but we haven't seen a commercial application that scale yet. But there's been a continuous concern that while okay we say the electricity might not be polluting, or we are able to get the thing from really solar sources or renewables, but just the process of making the battery, just the process of disposing the battery is so toxic to the environment. How do we deal with that, please?
No, it's not actually. That's not the case. So what happens with lithium? Now that's actually more of a problem of the lead acid because you've got an acid inside which people would actually, the recyclers would, they're not the serious recyclers, the smaller ones, they would actually pour that out. But when it comes to lithium, see, when you look at the lithium ion battery, the ingredients of a lithium ion battery, the content of a lithium ion battery are so valuable that you just don't go and throw it out into the thing. So when a battery has come into stationary applications, when it's coming to automotive, once it's done with automotive, it would go in for a basic recycling. It's not going to go in for a complete recycling where it's taken out and stripped and everything. It would then go into stationary applications. All the UPSs, all our inverters, which are using lithium lead acid batteries right now, would start using recycled lithium. So let's assume this life for a vehicle is about 5 years. It goes into stationary application, which are going to go on for about 10 years, 8 to 10 years. So you're looking at a battery which is going to come back for recycling in about, let's say, 12 to 15 years is the life cycle with what we anticipate. And even then, it's not going to be thrown away. There are materials that are going to be extracted from it, and new batteries are going to be made using that material. So it's not polluting for the environment at all.
Do you see a new supply chain or opportunities for startups dealing with electrical waste that now comes up from all of this?
Absolutely. So there is going to be substantial opportunities for recycling of the batteries and going into multiple other uses. So what we've done, for example, with our batteries, we use the cells that we use are very different from what a lot of other companies do. For example, we don't use cylindrical cells, we use pouch cells. Because what we've realized over the last so many years of being in the industry, that the recycling of or refurbishment, let me put it that way, of a cylindrical cell, you need much better and more expensive equipment than you do for a pouch cell or a prismatic cell. So we've gone to that technology, keeping in mind that you should be able to refurbish the battery and get it out to the market very quickly once it's finished with this industry. So there is going to be opportunities which come in not just for battery recycling and not just for battery waste management, but for everything else also that's going to come in. Charging infrastructure has to come in, battery swapping infrastructure for different vehicles will come in. So the whole ecosystem has to be created. So there are going to be opportunities across the board.
So one big thing on charging stations, right? I think that's the next thematic topic. We have a number of people who I know in the chat who are actually working very closely with the government on figuring out their urban strategies for charging. There's been a lot of talk. I think a lot of papers have come out on how governments can take leadership on this. So I'm going to combine a couple of questions. One, do you think India has arrived at a point where we now have a set of common standards in every state and in country for charging stations? A. B. Where are the policies you think are actually working to promote charging stations? And third, given what the government is under, particularly the fiscal issues that they have, how much do you think they'll be able to support or push for charging stations for the next couple of years?
When I began the whole presentation, I was talking about, different vehicles having different needs. Now let's look at different categories. Let's look at two-wheelers. Two-wheelers don't require any special infrastructure. They don't require a very, all we require is a very dense charging infrastructure, but not very special, not high speed, not required. You just need plug points. The way that you charge your mobile phone, that's how you're going to charge your two-wheelers as well. Majority of them, unless it's a very high speed vehicle, you need high speed charging, etc., which is
Uh,
very expensive.
Naveen, just for our audience, I'm going to pause you there to help out think out, right? A standard charger, you have your standard 5 watt, 15 watt,
Yeah,
plugs for a mobile phone. And then you have the higher rated things for running a washer, a dryer, 3,500, multiple kilowatts as
sure.
well, right? And so in India, as you start moving off from the urban, we have a wide variety of plug points, right? How much difference does it make from going from a very simple standard phone charging plug point to a much more robust let's call it a power socket, or that's really doesn't make a
Not-
difference in
It
charging
doesn't.
time?
It doesn't really make so much of a difference. Well, it does. If you're in a 5 amp versus a 15 amp, your speed will change. But then there is enough technology in the charger itself to be able to adjust to that as well.
But how much is
But
so if 5 amp takes 5 hours, is that
yeah,
what I remember?
so
So
we calculate 6 hours of a 0 to 100 on a 5 amp outlet. Now, if
and
you're a high
on a
speed,
15 amp,
it could be 4 hours, or it could be 3 hours, 3.5 to 4 hours.
what is the maximum ampere that you can take? Because we have a lot of startups who are really focusing on building out this charging infrastructure, right? And they're of course looking at a higher amperes. Can the current charging system handle higher amperes, or you've restricted it to about 15 amps?
So we can handle it. Our chargers can handle it, but we don't recommend that on a regular basis.
Okay.
That's okay once you're doing it, if you're doing it as a top up once in a while. But on a regular basis, it will have a detrimental quality on your battery. See what happens is, especially because of our conditions, given conditions in India, especially in North India, where the heat in summer. So you've got a battery which is being used or a vehicle which is being used at 45 degrees. The road temperature is probably about 50, 55 degrees, and the battery is again getting warm. So there's only air cooling. There's no water cool. There's no liquid cooling or any of that system, because you don't have that space in a two-wheeler. In a car, it's different. You can do all of that. You can do a cooling system for the battery. So in a two-wheeler, you've just ridden a vehicle at 45, 50 degrees outside, and then you come in to charge. So you can't do, again, very high-speed charging in that, because that's going to generate bulging in the battery. That's going to make the battery bulge. So what we recommend is that you stick to a normal charging, let the vehicle cool down. And there are enough measures also, there are enough safety measures to ensure that there's nothing that happens to the battery, even if you plug it in. But just the way that you take care of your mobile phone, you won't take your mobile phone, take it leave it out in the sun and plug it into charge. We generally don't do that. So don't do that with the vehicle, because at the end of the day, the technology that goes into your mobile phone versus what's going into the vehicle is kind of similar, the batteries.
So I think this is a very interesting, and I apologize to our audience for getting into a little bit of more technicalities on power charging. But the reason why this is so important when we ask about questions about converting charging stations, one of the problems that we've had with car charging is the need for some sort of specialized infrastructure, right? And you have to have a higher voltage or a higher wattage or a higher ampere, dedicated ports or connections if you really want to achieve, 3 to 5 to 6 hours. But Naveenji, it seems like, for example, if there is a corporate office, for a very small amount of money, they could have 20, 30 charging ports installed. It's just an electrician and running some cable and making sure there is an adequate power supply at the end. We aren't talking about investing thousands and thousands of dollars. You could set up 10, 20 charging stations as long as you have a good power distribution coming in for $500,000.
So easier said than done in a way. For two-wheelers, you can easily do that. All you need is just a battery bank, just banks of chargers there. But it's not quite the same for cars. For cars, you need much
No,
more.
I meant for two-wheelers. For cars,
Yeah,
of course, you need that special infrastructure. But I think the opportunity for India in terms of two-wheelers also
you need.
is that we are not looking at the conversation around cars and range anxiety and charging stations is a much more difficult one compared to what you're talking about two-wheelers. And I think that is one of the reasons why two-wheelers may take off in a much faster way in India, because you could theoretically set up a charging station anywhere where there's electricity.
Absolutely. In fact, you could charge it off a portable charger as well. I mean, which is basically your inverter or something like that. You don't even need this thing. So we've got numerous customers where they've got batteries which are being charged even for B2B. They've got batteries being charged in the back. The guy goes, does a milk run, comes back, takes the battery, plugs it in. Or he's got one battery at home and one battery in office. There are numerous other models that people are using it, how they're using it. In fact, in some parts of this thing, I was told that there is a business which they've created in rural areas where they are getting charged batteries to the customer and taking the old ones back as well.
Classic India, right? At least you're
So,
able to
so
find.
that jugaad stuff is happening.
I still remember, if you go to Indonesia or Bali and all, they have those roadside radios which sell you like,
Petrol.
a petrol by,
Yeah.
by, by,
You
by
still
the
have that in Goa,
bottle.
by the way. You still see that in Goa.
You still see that go, right? And I think there might be a future where if we have enough standardized batteries, you'll have the battery radio wala, you give a battery, you take a
Yeah,
battery.
yeah. Possible. It's possible.
You have that sort of thing there.
The problem is that kind of a model right now, sorry to this thing, is
Please,
that
please.
right now the companies which are looking at battery swapping as a business, for example, the batteries that they're looking at are all not in uniform size.
No, of course. I mean,
So
uniform size. There has to be standardization here, right?
so
For
the
this to
issue with
really
that
work.
is, yeah, so you're going to go to one company, then you can't use other companies' batteries. So there are issues with that right now.
So indeed, we have a lot of entrepreneurs and investors on this or on this webinar. One of the concerns which you had raised somewhere in the middle of your presentation was the reputational risk that comes with a lot of players sort of coming in, right? We have a number of questions from a few perhaps either would-be entrepreneurs or investors. There are a lot of startups who've been going around raising funding, pushing in, saying, "Hey, we're going to come into the two-wheeler electrical space. Here's the technology licensed or newly imported," and they start going to push out into localized area. Um, how should we think about this? I mean, on one hand, you mentioned, the great crisis you had back in 2011, 2012, where was that huge, a moment where everybody started going bankrupt, and then customers were like, you know what, I'm not going to touch this space, right? Because it's a fad. People are going bankrupt. I buy something there, a car at least you buy. You now have major players there. What's your advice to these people? Should they come in? How do you see them?
Um, See, the way we see this industry, I'm extremely bullish about this industry, but also very clearly, this is not a short-term game. This is not no matter which way you look at it, there will always be hurdles and there will always be problems as they exist for any business, especially in the one where you're trying to convert, where there's disruption happening. That said, once the disruption begins, the pace of disruption is so large, and that's why I wanted to show, in a span of 13 years, how New York changed. There's a video on YouTube by Tony Seba. You should take a look at it, on which he talks about disruption and how fast markets are going to get disrupted. So disruption is going to change the whole world completely. It's going to change the way that we commute very, very soon. It's not going to be very far off. So when anybody's coming in, when you're looking at coming in, one, look at it from a perspective of, see, when you look at the future, you also have to look at how the past has evolved. So how our own automotive industry has evolved in the last 40 years, it's a kind of a similar evolution that we're going to go through. It's not going to happen that suddenly, this market is all a commuter segment, but here it's all lifestyle. The market's completely changed. The price point here is 80,000, here it's 2 lakhs. And that's where the whole game, it's not going to happen that way. What's going to happen is there's going to be a transition which happens from IC to electric. Price points may increase over a period of time. Performance is going to continue improving over a period of time. But for anybody coming in, they have to look at it from a long-term perspective. If they believe in the model, if they believe that this market is going to convert, then it's got to be looked at like a marathon. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So you've got to look at it
This
from a
isn't a
long-term.
get-rich-quick scheme. You launch a sexy electrical vehicle startup. You are hoping for some, let's say, very generous, well-known international backers to come in and give you $1 billion to burn through to try to capture the market. This is something that's going to still be a 3 to 4 to 5 year game at the very least, to slowly slog through establishing the concept, the market, the service stations. Ajay, I know we are sort of hitting the time. We have about 13 minutes on the clock left. A few questions coming in, which I thought, you might be the best to answer. You've talked about maintenance, right? Several times, and the need for it. Where is the maximum maintenance required in an electrical scooter today? Is it the battery? Is it the mechanical functions? What's the experience of a user? That cars, everybody knows there's a standard list of 20 things that go wrong, and you have to change the oil, you have to look at the coolant, there's the tires, this, that, etc. There's a huge standard list on there. What does that list look like for a scooter? What's the major worries?
See, what happens is that for a new customer, let's say a first-time electric vehicle customer who's never sat on an electric vehicle, who's never handled an electric vehicle, the first set of issues, or the not problems, but I would say learning that he's got to do, is things like sometimes the connectors loosen themselves, and what happens is because of our portable battery, so we've got connectors which have to be robust enough and strong enough to stay and be able to withstand all the bumps and the potholes and everything that we throw at the vehicles, but yet be flexible enough to be able to, for a customer to open it easily. The whole connection, the way the battery is stored in the vehicle, again, it's got to be easy enough to be taken out, but yet be robust enough in order for the battery not to shake too much during all these potholes, etc. So for a customer, in the first few weeks, the issues, if they happen, are more to do with the connectors themselves, how the connectors react with each other. It's not a problem, but it's just that they don't understand it sometimes. Sometimes the connectors just kind of the same. Motors, nothing really happens. Batteries, there's seldom anything that really happens in a battery, and you just replace the battery. Then the percentage of battery replacement is probably less than 1%. In motors, it's less than 0.2 or 0.3%, something like that. Mechanicals are the same as what you have for IC engine mechanicals. The shockers, the wheels, the tires, the brakes, etc., are all very similar.
And in India, they go through a lot of wear and tear.
So it's a much simpler system. So you basically plug it into these electronic dynamo, which measures and which tells you the battery performance, the motor, etc. If your battery is not working fine, you just take out the battery, plug in a new one. And if your motor is not okay, you again do the same thing. But that's seldomly that happens. It's not. So
it's usually just the general wear and tear. Literally often the rubber meeting the road, so to speak, and those. So you're not worried about the main components. I mean that anxiety is no longer there. That you have your engine has collapsed, you need to replace it, and the expense of that, or the battery is there. So because those are the if something makes up 80-90% of the cost, replacing or repairing those are really expensive. But if it's just the 5-10% at the margin, okay, new wheel or the suspension issue a little bit fixed, all of that I think is very reasonable, G.
So we do call in our customers a few weeks later just to explain to them about the connectors and everything. Should this happen, connector ka kaise karna and handling, and
ek baar update close, sort of that could be the biggest issue that you're facing. I think for startups, obviously Hero is going to be a giant in this space. You've put so much investment, time, energy, money, decades of experience. What are some of the ecosystem players you would like to see entrepreneurs come in to support? What is their opportunities to either sell to you or sell to your customers or create things that would help this ecosystem, which you perhaps won't want to do, but you'd be very happy if you have some young entrepreneurs who are really smart and dedicated to this space do?
So there's a lot of work. So let's rule out some of the basic things. Let's rule out, for example, battery manufacturing. Now a small startup will struggle with that. They could be good assemblers of battery, but not really a manufacturer of battery. Where they could really come into play is things like telematics, things like BMSs. So anything, chargers for that matter, which are universal chargers in that sense. So some of the the technology that's going to go in, the IT stuff, the softwares, etc. BMS is a very, very critical part of the whole thing. Telematics.
Would you buy a BMS from a startup?
Yeah, you could.
You believe that if there was a solid VMS, you would plug out your existing one and push theirs in?
It's not quite the same way as taking out this thing. So that's the BMS has got to work very well with the battery, etc., and the warranties and all of that stuff as well. So it's going to be a long process for the evaluation, for testing it, and making sure that the battery they work in sync with each other.
There's a huge amount of innovation still required in this space. You aren't happy with what you have right now.
It's a constant improvement that's going to happen. So it's not about we are never happy with the quality. We are never happy with what
it's always an aspiration, right?
We always have to look for improvements. Absolutely. So we are not getting comfortable in our shoes. We have to look for constant change, and that's what we're doing. So there are lots of areas when it comes to these kind of technologies where startups could have a role to play.
I mean, on exports, do you see your, given the India supply chain, the cost, the manufacturing, one of the big things that we've seen is India now really becoming a force in Africa in the two-wheeler segment, right? Earlier it was a super Chinese market, and now for the first time we've seen last 4 to 5 years at least, there's an Indian dominance that has come there, and that's just through long-term quality, consistency, execution. Which markets do you see you would focus on if you're looking at exports? I mean, obviously China is becoming one of the largest players in this segment. You have at least on the high performance level, a lot of competition in the US, in Europe, and such. Where do you see yourself fitting into the exports? Does India have an export story here?
So we actually got into the international markets very long back. Actually, 2012 is when we really got into the international markets with a very clear-cut focus that we want to be. India story is going to be different, and the international story is going to be different. Now, at that point, we were looking only purely at the either the European markets or the American markets or the Japanese or the Korean or the Australian markets, those kind of markets. And those are not electric scooter markets, essentially. Those are more of electric bicycle markets. And so we've had a subsidiary abroad for a very, very long time, and that continues to work in those territories, in those markets. And that's a market which is very, very large market.
And that's the electrical cycles.
Electric cycles.
Yeah. Why don't we see those in here? I mean, China has reached a point where you have to throw them around.
So, again, like I said, aspirations. Our aspirations are very different. Then we look at the price point. A good electric cycle will cost almost the same as an electric scooter.
So right, because the same battery, the same everything.
Similar, yeah. So somewhat similar, and then we switch that way. But when you look at it from a standpoint within Europe, Western Europe, for example, they're using electric cycles even more than they're using either cycles, because one of the inclines, second, less stress on the knees, and third, they're not even taking out a car as much, but taking an electric cycle out to get the exercise.
And it's a lot more of a lifestyle change rather than it's an affordability issue.
It's a mindset change as well.
The mindset, yeah. I mean, like you have those cycle highways all across Western Europe, and people are like, "Hey, I'm really happy to have a little bit of extra power rather than having to pedal through all of them."
Absolutely.
Ajay, we are almost out of time. Any last thoughts, particularly on what the government needs to do to really support this massive change? I mean, it seems that we are on an inflection point, right? And in the curve, we are just sort of, maybe 2 years from the tipping. Where can the government come in to give that final push? Lots of good announcements. Niti Aayog, as you said, 2030 is their aim. What are the fundamental things that the government can do? I know several of your industry counterparts, for example, have been very vocal of, how vehicles are classified and taxed, right? And, 2 versus 3 versus 4 engines and all of this. But what can the government, the 1 or 2 things they can do, which would, easy to do, it's a small policy change, but which would dramatically change things on the ground?
So a number of things. One thing that the government, that we have to do is have very stringent and very clear-cut state policies, and then not deviate from those. So flipping, flopping, causes confusion, both in the minds of the local manufacturers, local companies, and also for investments coming in from outside. If anybody looking to set up technology investments, etc., and if there's constant change that keeps on happening, they don't know how to invest.
I mean, if you are going to be investing in a battery factory, you need a 10, 15, 20 years sort of outlook, right? You can't have a new policy every 2 minutes.
You need a horizon. Yeah. The second factor is that when we look at it, the primary goal is demand creation. Now the battery prices have come down to a much more reasonable level. But when you look at it from a 5 years stand back, when we introduced lithium-ion batteries, they were way too expensive. To get customers to start using lithium-ion batteries as again lead was a huge uphill task. So leveling out prices, because the minute you're looking at localization, effectively you're also increasing your price in a lot of components, simply because you don't have those level of volume here. So that leveling out needs to be done. Demand creation is a very, so either a carrot or a stick approach. Now, in the case
and usually it's going to be a combination of both, right? Taxes, subsidies on one side, penalties, and particularly in a city like Delhi, where it's become a gas chamber problem. I think electrical two-wheelers, but, just given the distances that are Delhi, I was shocked when I was looking at a lot of our maps. Delhi is actually a very compressed place. It's not that far, we aren't looking at 100, 200 kilometers, everything is accessible. Most people are within a 20, 30-kilometer range.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so we need very strong policies and then stick to those policies. So if it's 80% or 100% conversion by 2030, then you do a backward calculation on what is required now. Infrastructure, whatever be the case, if you have to use a stick somewhere, use a stick somewhere. We've already done that in the past. Auden, even, for example, that was a stick, but for a short period of time. So there are numerous such things which can be done, but the primary one being demand creation. Once you create demand, you look at the e-rick market, for example, highly, highly unregulated, but yet that market is now bigger than your conventional rickshaw market. And that's an ecosystem which has got created in spite of the government not really pushing it in that direction because it made economic sense. So the riders have understood it, the users have understood it, it makes commercial sense for everybody, so the market is taken off, and now everything else is falling in place, localization, manufacturing, etc.
And, so and like you said, the biggest thing is awareness, right? If the government, were to go and do a massive ad campaign, which is done for a lot of other social issues very effectively, and start saying that, look, as your government, if you trust us, go electric, right? And, this is something that's a big credibility push that the industry needs right now, because there is that mental block. People need to get that switch. Although, with 150, 200,000, 300,000 units there, I think it's about a word of mouth. It's a couple of years away from really kicking off. Naveen, thank you so much for doing this. I think all of us really appreciated the in-depth that we managed to get in on this conversation. We'd love to have you back for more of these. It was an absolute delight. And thank you so much for answering every question. I think we still have another 25, 30 left. I wish we could go on for another hour or so, but I'm conscious of everybody's time. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you all for having me.